So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, which is managing project tasks using left brain and leading project teams using right brain. My name is Ahmed Rashid. I'm the Deputy Managing Director at Virginia Institute. I am also the Project Management Principal at the Institute. I know it is Thursday afternoon, and you are all keen to start your weekend. So I promise you this will be a very brief webinar, but yet beneficial one for all of you. So I expect the webinar to take around 25 minutes, something like that, and then I will open the floor to answer all your questions. So let me start very quickly with sharing some logistical issues about the webinar with you. So the webinar is being recorded. You will receive a link after the webinar ends where you can access the webinar record and you can watch the webinar at your convenience. You can also share it with your colleagues. And if you have any questions, please make sure you type your question in the Q&A chat, and I will make sure to answer all your questions before we end our webinar. At the end of the webinar, you will receive a 1-minute survey and a webinar certificate for full attendance. So for more webinars and courses, you can access our website at viftraining.com. So what is our webinar about? Basically, as the title suggests, we will concentrate on the 3 main topics today. We'll talk about the relationship between project management and the 2 hemispheres of the brain, the left and the right brain. And why do we need both parts of the brain in order to succeed in managing our projects? After that, we'll move into how to engage the the left brain in managing our project tasks, and what are the functions of the left brain that can help us in managing our project tasks. And then at the end, we'll talk about engaging the right brain in leading our project teams and the functions that relate to right brain and the project teams. So let me start with the first topic here, which is project management and the 2 hemispheres of the brain. So as you can see on the screen, there are the left brain and the right brain. If you visit any medical doctor and you ask them about the brain, they will tell you that your brain is composed of 4 parts. But in project management and in management, generally speaking, we distinguish between the left and the right brain. The left brain has to do with the following functions: analysis, logic, idea, facts, math, training. So basically, if you are competent in using Microsoft Project, Excel, drawing project network diagrams, Gantt charts, bar charts, resource leveling, calculating KPIs, key performance indicators for project progress, all of this comes under the left brain functions. So this has to do with your IQ, which stands for your intelligence quotient. These are the technical skills. These are the hardest skills because they are more or less technical in nature. Project management, technical competence. On the other hand, you can see that the right brain functions include creativity, intuition, arts, creation, imagination, and more. So the right brain has to do with the soft skills, the human skills, the interpersonal skills, the skills that you need to manage the expectations of your project stakeholders. So they do not have to do with your IQ, but they have to do with your EQ, which is emotional quotient. So in this webinar, I want to try to let you understand the difference between managing your projects and leading your project teams, and why you need to engage with both your left and right brain. So if we look at a further detail here, you can see that the left hemisphere, the left part of the brain, has to do with these functions again: logic, reasoning, language, analysis, and all of these functions are mandatory for any project manager because they are important to manage your project tasks, and you depend on them more when you are at a junior level as a project practitioner. But once you move to a more senior level in your career path as a project manager to become more of senior director or such, you start depending more on the functions related to the right brain, where they have to do, as you can see here, with feelings, with empathy, communication, leadership, emotional intelligence, and such. So with our stakeholders, project stakeholders, we cannot use and engage only the left brain with them. They are humans of flesh and blood and feeling, and we need to engage with them using our right brain functions. So this, what right brain functions are all about. So remember that you need to balance both of them. If you are technically a competent project manager, you know how to use your left brain and you know how to do mathematical formulas and draw technical diagrams and Gantt charts and such, this is 50% of being successful in a project management. If you are only good as a project manager being a right brain project manager, only, communicating effectively with the stakeholders, leading them, empathizing with them. This is not enough again. You need to have a balanced approach between left and right brain's functions. So many of you maybe heard of the PMI. The PMI, which stands for the Project Management Institute, actually, they have emphasized many times that as a project practitioner, you need to make sure that you have the three skills, important skills, and they refer to it as the talent triangle. So they emphasize that as a project practitioner, you need to have the technical skills, but you also need to have the leadership skills that has to do with humans and the project stakeholder and such. And you also have to have the business acumen, which refers to strategic alignment between the projects and the strategic objectives of your organization. So the technical skills, this is where you would need your left brain in order to master your technical skills. But for your soft skills, for leadership, for communication and such, this is where you need to engage with your right brain, and that's why we need both left and right brain. During the webinar, I'll make sure that both brains are activated. We'll have fun exercises at the end so that you can make sure that your right brain is engaged as well as your left brain. So remember, as a project manager, you need to understand that both hemispheres of the brain are very important when it comes to a project management. And that links to a project constraint. So we all know that the project constraints, since 100 years ago, they always emphasize what we call the iron triangle or the triple constraint, where basically every project manager need to be familiar and need to understand the project scope, the project duration and time, and the budget related to the project. And the challenge here is sometimes you are forced to do what we call trade-off analysis. You sacrifice something related to scope to finish on time. But when you do that, maybe your budget will be impacted. You sacrifice something sometimes related to time in order to gain something related to scope. So you need to learn how to do a scope analysis. Now, in a traditional project management, if you are only engaging with your left brain, your goal is always and aim always to achieve the scope on time and within the agreed budget with your stakeholder. But when it comes with the right brain function, when you use your right brain, this is where you become learning how to be flexible, agile in the way you manage your projects, and you adopt what we call adaptive planning rather than traditional planning. So the idea is not only about managing the project scope and time and cost. Sometimes quality is more important than time and scope. Sometimes cost is more important. It depends really on the nature of your project. So instead of having the triple constraints here, which is basically the scope, time, and cost, we are nowadays moving more towards what we call competing constraints, because these constraints will be competing with each other. And as a project manager, you need to learn how to, as I said, a trade-off between these constraints. And to do that, definitely you need to be creative, and you need to depend more on your right brain that has to do with the flexibility and adaptability and such. So moving forward, for example, now the triple constraints are important, but how about risk? How about resources? Under risk, for example, you need to be creative. And to do that, you need to engage with your right brain, because creativity is a function of your right brain. When you develop risk responses, when you identify risk, when you deal with them, when you deal with the human resources, for example, the manpower working on the project, again, you need to motivate them, communicate with them, coach them. And this requires, again, your right brain. But for scope, quality, sometimes time and cost, you depend more on your left brain. So the idea here, when you are managing the project constraints, again, you are depending on both parts of the brain. You cannot afford only to depend on one side of the brain, because you will succeed only in managing certain domains of the project, but other domains will be neglected and will not be managed the right way. So moving forward, the project management versus project leadership. So as I said, when you are managing your project task, you will depend on your left brain. However, when you are leading your project teams, you will depend on your right brain. So here are some functions under project tasks. Under project task, you will develop key performance indicators. You'll have to control the progress of your project. You'll have to direct and plan using certain tools and techniques, such as work breakdown structure, such as Gantt chart. You need to organize the effort. But on the other side, you want to make sure that you are engaging with the project team, the stakeholders, motivating them, recognizing effort, coaching them, counseling them, building the team, which we'll talk about later on. So both parts of the brain are very important here. So I wanted to make a quick poll here. So before I show you the difference between a project manager and a project leader, there is a quick poll. I will send it to you, and just I want to see your responses here. So here you go. You should receive a quick question on your screen now, and I just want you to answer. The question is simply, are project leaders born or made? So I want to see your opinion. Are they born, made, or both? So please, I'll give you a few seconds to respond and just click. Okay, so the majority are saying more towards made. Well, I have to slightly disagree with that. Sometimes majority, yes, it is about, the project manager can be made, the project leader can be made, but there are certain traits, certain abilities that we are born with as individual that can help us to succeed as a project leaders. But it doesn't mean that we are born as a project leaders. So if you have the foundation to succeed as a project leader, the traits, the characteristics, and you are born with them, such as being charismatic and such, then this will help you to do an outstanding job in a project leadership. However, if you don't have them, it doesn't mean that you cannot become a successful leader or in managing your project. So if you look here, a project manager is a planner, organizer, coordinator. All of these functions are performed by you as a project manager. But at the same time, we want you to be more of a project leader. We want you to have the vision crystal clear for all your project team members. We want you to be able to challenge the status quo, the processes, the tools being used in the project. We want you to be able to inspire others, develop the talent of your team. So the project leader is all about doing the right things. A project manager is all about doing things the right way, and you need both in a project manager. So to succeed in project management, you need to exercise what I refer to as managerial leadership. Managerial leadership basically means that you are a project manager, but at the same time, you are a project leader. If you are only technically competent in doing the functions of management, that's not enough. If you are only competent in knowing how to deal with your stakeholders and team members and such, that's not enough. Again, a balanced approach is what we aim at. We want you to be a project manager and a project leader at the same time. And the majority of you, when they responded yes, that the project leader is made, you are right. Again, I emphasize that, but there are certain traits or characteristics that can help you to succeed as a project leader. So more differences very quickly between project management and the project leader. So you can see here that the left brain has to do with these functions. So as a project manager, you need to be efficient. And efficiency means that you accomplish what you are supposed to accomplish in terms of project tasks and activities, but while you are considering the cost of achieving your tasks and activities. So you need to have routine and processes, systems as a project managers. They value systems more than people. They are specialized. They train their team members and such. And all of these are parts of the left brain side and the left hemisphere of the brain. But when it comes to project leadership, these are the functions that you need to have, and this is where definitely we need your right brain to perform these functions the right way. So you need to be effective and not efficient. Effectiveness means that you need to make sure that you accomplish the tasks regardless of how much it will cost or the effort that it will take to accomplish the task. As a project leader, you value change over a crisis. So you are more proactive rather than reactive. You do not wait in the project until a catastrophe happens or something goes wrong. But every now and then, while you are executing your project, you stop and you ask yourself how I can make things better, how I can introduce new processes and tools and techniques. So this is where you are being more proactive and you are exercising continuous improvement. Under a project leadership, you value people more than systems. Interactions and individuals are more important for you than systems, policies, and such. So you can tell you need to be creative. You need to be creative in the way you manage your projects, such as adopting agile project management, Scrum, extreme programming, all new methodologies under project management, rather than following the traditional waterfall project cycle. So these are all functions of the right brain, and that's why, again, I'm saying that you need to balance between the left and the right brain when you are managing your projects. So to end this topic, I want to share with you a quick and a practical definition of a project management. So you can see in the literature and many references different definitions for project management, but I like this one because it really emphasizes the importance of both brains, the left and the right brain. Very quickly, it says here, project management is the planning, delegating, monitoring, and controlling of all aspects of the project. And definitely this part has to do with, guess what? The left brain that has to do with your hard and technical skills that will help you in planning and monitoring and controlling your project aspects. But on the other side, it's also the motivation of those involved to achieve the project objectives and to achieve the targets. And to do that, definitely you will need your right brain that has to do with your softer skills and that has to do with your human and interpersonal skills. So even in the definition of the project management, you can see that there is a built-in, reference to left and right brain. For I come now to managing project tasks, which is the second one, the second topic. So as we said, when you manage a project task, definitely you will depend more on your left brain because a project task requires your technical competence. So under managing project tasks, I summarize the most important project tasks under 3 categories here. So you need to plan your project, you need to schedule the project activities, and you need to control your project. So under planning, you will answer the question of what I need to do. Under scheduling, you'll answer the questions that start with when I need to do every activity. So basically, planning, scheduling, and controlling will require from you the left brain more than the right brain. Let me show you why, and I will show you a few techniques that relates to each one of these functions under managing project tasks. So let me start with planning. When you plan, the most famous and common tool that we use or technique is what we call WBS. And WBS stands for work breakdown structure. Now, what does it mean? Basically, you come up with your project brief and a project definition, and you try to decompose it into smaller activities and then sequence between these activities. So the WBS or work breakdown structure is the decomposition of your project objective into smaller manageable activities or tasks. And then you start estimating the duration, the resources, the budget of each one of these tasks, linking between them in order to come up with a plan for your project and the entire project duration and how you are going to manage your project. And to do that, frankly speaking, you need more of your left brain because the WBS is more a technical tool than a tool than communication. So here you will talk about the cost estimation, the budget estimation, the duration estimation. And to do that, again, you need to have high-level competence in analysis and calculation and such. So WBS, usually the most famous techniques that we use when we are composing our WBS is decomposition, where we decompose the project objective into smaller manageable tasks, or we can depend on templates from a previous projects that we worked at, and we assume that the same activities and tasks can be executed in the current project. So this is WBS. But if you want guidelines more about WBS and checklist, here you go. Some quick guidelines on how to develop your WBS. So it can be developed either using a top-down or a bottom approach. The top-down means that you start with the project objective, and then you break it down into smaller, as I said, manageable activities. But the bottom up, on the other side, you start with the lowest level of activities, and then you start building up your project plan. Now, how you organize your WBS, again, it can be in different ways. Either it can be functional related, or it depends on, it can be related to project deliverables or project phases and such. So the idea is when you are developing the WBS, you need to be technical in the approach, and that's why you need your left. However, if you want to become more creative when you are planning your project, you can adopt what we call nowadays adaptive planning and predictive planning. And this is part of the functions related to the right brain. So the traditional, let me call it, way of managing projects, as some of you know, we used to initiate the project, planning, executing, and then we close the project. And in the process, we monitor and control the project execution, planning, and closing. And this is what we call predictive planning. However, adaptive planning now, that you don't need to follow this sequential processes. but rather iteration planning, which means that you break down your projects into different cycles and iterations, and each time you start planning the iteration. So basically, you are adopting what we call a progressive elaboration, rolling wave planning, which means that I don't plan the project from the start until the end at the beginning of the project, but rather I plan incremental steps. So I plan just phase one or iteration one. Once I'm almost about to finish it, I start planning phase two and phase three and such. When you are doing that, you are being more creative and you are more, of course, depending on the right brain. And for traditional projects, usually we use predictive planning and the traditional cycle of project management. But with a project that are complex, complicated, that are not clear when it comes to scope and the requirements from the stakeholders, we adopt more adaptive and flexible planning, which require you to be more agile and require more your right brain functions. So time boxing is one way on how to use your right brain, because time boxing is a concept in agile project management. And you can see that the idea here is that you dedicate a fixed time to limit yourself to finish an activity. So usually examples of time boxes could be the iteration of certain phase between 2 to 4 weeks and the daily stand-up meetings that you have with the project teams for 15 minutes. So the time boxing is basically the fixed duration of certain activities that you finish. So it's not a matter of finishing one activity and starting another one, but it's rather than that, it's all about the estimating of certain activities in terms of certain measurement units, and then you start building your project plan based on these estimates. And at the end of every iteration, you stop to do what we call retrospective, where you share lessons learned to adopt them for future project. So I'm just showing you this as a concept, a new concept in planning that relates to the right brain and not left brain, because time boxing is not the same as the traditional way of managing and planning your projects. And now we come to the second function of a project task, which is scheduling. So scheduling is all about when to do every activity that I entered in my WBS or work breakdown structure. So scheduling, although it is important, but it is not the only used tool to manage our project. So remember that when you are scheduling, this is where you will do technical work, and again, it will depend more on the left brain functions. So many of you are familiar with bar charts or Gantt charts, and many of you are familiar with the critical path method, for example, identifying the critical path on my project network and the critical activities that my eyes need to be on them all the time in order to finish on time. And also, some of you are familiar with what we call the PERT approach, which is a program evaluation and review technique. So these are pure technical tools that can help you to schedule your projects. It's outside the scope of our webinar to go in depth about these tools and techniques, but I just wanted to show you that when it comes to scheduling, you will depend more on the left brain and use technical tools such as critical path method and the PERT evaluation. So some of you are familiar with the project network diagramming, where you draw a project network and you start estimating the duration and start estimating the project duration, and then assigning the resources and estimating budgets and such. So there is more than one way on how to draw your project network. Either you draw using what we call activity on node. You place the activity inside a node and then an arrow coming out from an activity leading to another activity. Or there is another way of drawing, which we call activity on arrow network, where you have the activities on top of the arrows and there are certain points connecting between the activities. So whether you are using any method in scheduling your task, again, you will depend on your left brain, because you need to do calculation, you need to do some mathematics here, and also you need to do some technical network diagram. So again, this will depend on your left brain. The last function here related to the left brain is controlling. So under controlling, it's all about developing your key performance indicators to control the progress of the project. So you need to understand what are my KPIs, the key performance indicators that I will have my eyes on them all the time to make sure that I am on the right track, and that will allow me to take either corrective or preventive actions. And to do that, you need to have a project baseline so that you can compare your actuals later to the project baseline. But again, remember that you need, as a project manager, to achieve control at the macro and micro level. Micro level means self-control before you start controlling the project. And these are a quick list of some of the activities that you can use in order to control the team members' performance and your performance as a project manager. So again, controlling is a function in a project management that will require the engagement of your left brain, because basically you will develop key performance indicators such as schedule variance, cost variance, some lagging key performance indicators to talk about the performance of your project. But you will also need to develop some leading KPIs that has to do with your project forecasting and what would happen in the future if you are working on the same track. So all of this, again, will require that you are engaged with your left brain, because you will deal with numbers and KPIs and control systems and such. So the last part of our webinar is leading project teams. So what are we going to talk about here? I will talk about the most important soft skills that you need to apply when you are leading your project teams or engaging with your project stakeholders. So basically, I will concentrate on creating synergy among team members and how you develop the project, which are two important topics when it comes to leading project teams. So team building is a must for a project team. And from day number one, when you start working in the project as a project manager, you need to start thinking how I will build my team and end up having a high performance team. So the idea, you do not want to end up having a group of team members, but rather committed individuals to the project objectives that you can refer to as a team. So what is the difference between a group and a team? Have a look at this quick comparison between a group and a team. You can see here that they are not the same, and we always emphasize the word team rather than a group. So we want to work with the project teams and not project groups. So under a team, they collect performance. So they are basically having collective performance, meaning that they are accountable, all team members are accountable. They depend on each other. There is a high level of interdependence between team members and project team members. So under a team, they are all having a positive synergy, not a neutral one or negative like you see under a group. Under a team, the accountability will be both individual and mutual. So every individual working in the project will be accountable for their own results, but as a team, project team, they will be accountable on the team performance. Under a team, and that's the most important distinguish between a group and a team. Under a team, the skills are complementary, which means that the project team members, they complement each other. It means that they complete each other. They complement each other strength. So they complete each other. If I am good at one area and another project manager is good with in another area, so we complete each other. But under a group, they are random and vary those skills. So we emphasize here that to build your team, again, you need to use functions related to the right brain, such as leadership, emotional intelligence, team building, conflict resolution, communication, all of these interpersonal skills. And to end up having a high performance team, you need definitely to make sure that you are having a shared vision and you have commitment on the project goals. You need to make sure that you are all synchronized and having high level of synergy and harmony. You need to make sure that you are all accountable on the project, so you are all on the same boat. And you need to make sure that the skills are complementary, which means that they are completing each other. As a matter of fact, synergy means that the sum of the group is greater than the sum of the individual part, which means that as a project team, when we are working together, the output will be much greater than our individual output if we are working alone. And that's why we represent teamwork sometimes with the formula by 1 + 1 = more than 2, which means that the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the individual part. And the acronym team is very famous and important to keep in mind. So remember, the word team itself stands for together, everyone achieves more. which means that again, when we are together working as a project team, the output of working together will be more than 2. It could be 3, 11, 1,000. So the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the individual parts, because we are working in harmony and synchronization together as a project team. So I want to share with you now some characteristics of high-performing teams, project teams, and these are common sense. So you need to have a common purpose as a project team, and this is where the project leader want to make sure that they have the purpose and the project objective clear for all the project team members. We need to have a clarity when it comes to role and responsibility. Many of you, if you are familiar with the RACI matrix, so the project manager will develop some RACI matrix, which stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. And also need to exercise effective leadership and build relationships. And at the end, you need to make sure that the communication is open at all levels between team members and the project stakeholders, vertical, horizontal communication at all levels. So all of these will lead to a high-performing team. To end up our discussion about project teams, I wanted to share with you the stages of building a high-performing team. So first you start by forming the team, and then by storming, and then you enter into a phase of what we call norming and then performing. And once the project is closed, then this is what we call adjourning. Now, why is that important? Because any project team will pass through all these stages of building the team. And as a project manager, you want to exercise leadership and communication, and again, engage with your right brain functions in order to make sure that there is a smooth transition from one phase to another. Let me briefly and quickly talk about each one of these stages. So under forming, you start the project and you talk about the roles and responsibilities, and the leadership style that we recommend here for you as a project leader will be directing style, basically telling your project teams what to do and when to do, because they are yet to get to know each other, so they are not ready to take responsibilities or to make decisions. So you as a team leader, you need to exercise what we call a directing leadership style, which is basically telling them what to do and when to do it. So it's more of an autocratic leadership style, but because it is the beginning of the project. Then when the team moves into what we call a storming phase or a stage, this is where you start adopting a different leadership style, which is selling, coaching them, selling your ideas to the team. This is where you interact with them. It's a two-way communication, but the project leader will make the decisions and will take the decisions because the team is more mature, but until now, they are not ready to participate in decision making. So again, the attitude of the team members here that they will give opinions and feedback, but the decision making or taking will be still in the hands of the project lead. And the third stage is norming. When everything becomes normal, they understand each other requirements, the team member, they get to know each other, they know their goals, then you can move as a leader to what we call a supported or supportive leadership style, where you ask the team members to participate in taking decisions related to the project because they are more mature, they have job maturity, they have knowledge, competence, skills, and they have psychological maturity where they are maybe confident and competent about their work. And then the one before the last is the performing, and this is where you become a high-performing team. You could have some conflicts, but they are handled in a civilized manner. And this is where you adopt what we call a delegating leadership style. You empower the team, and the team will be able to manage themselves and to plan the project and organize the task. And if they need any help, they come back to you. So as you've seen, depending on the project team stage, you need to understand that there will be different leadership styles that need to be applied. And again, all these leadership styles and all these competencies that you need are part of your right brain. Adjourning, of course, is if the team finish the project and close, they need to celebrate at the end. And this is, again, where you communicate and emphasize the success of the project teams, and you make sure that everyone is being rewarded for their efforts during the project and such. So this is where you need to have adaptive leadership. Adaptive leadership basically is all about situational leadership. It means that if you are in the forming stage, then you need to use directing style. But if you are in performing stage, then delegating style, as I showed you earlier. So the idea here, you cannot allow yourself to depend only on one leadership style. You need to adopt different leadership styles depending on the situation, depending on the maturity of the project team members, depending on the tasks that you are working at, depending on the interest of the stakeholders in the project, and many other factors. And that's why we refer to it as adaptive leadership style or situation leadership style. The model has been there for many years and been testing. So you can see here that we have here the styles that I talked about earlier, where you use directing, sometimes selling or coaching, sometimes supporting and delegating. It all depends on the maturity of the team. So a quick example, if we are saying that the team competence is low, but they are highly committed, so they are at a developing stage of one, then we recommend that you use with them a directing leadership style. However, if the team is having high competence, high commitment, they are fully developed, then we recommend you use with them delegating style. So again, this chart emphasizes the idea of adaptive leadership, where you need to adopt different leadership styles depending on the situation. And the last two slides here before I do some exercises to activate your right brain is remember that the right brain is needed not only in leading your project team, but also in managing the expectations of your stakeholders. Many of you are familiar with the famous power interest stakeholder matrix, where you categorize your stakeholders into different types. So if the stakeholder is having high level of interest and high level of power, then this is where you need to manage them closely, and you need really to communicate effectively with them, lead them, listen to them, empathize with them, because they are important to your project. However, if the stakeholders are having, for example, low power and low interest, you only need to monitor them. The challenge here is that stakeholders keep jumping from one quadrant to another. So you might start a project where you have a stakeholder by the name of A, right here as low power and low interest, and suddenly during the project, they become here at high power and high interest. So the idea, you need to make sure that you always keep monitoring them. So to engage with your stakeholders, to manage their expectations, you want to make sure that you understand their expectations by, again, depending on functions related to the right brain, and to get their support, you also need some skills and competencies related to the right brain. So this is what I was talking about. So if you want to engage about your stakeholders, let's imagine that John, for example, currently is unaware of my, a project, but to succeed in my project, I need to move John from being unaware to supportive. So there is a gap. How can I bridge the gap? By using my right brain functions, such as communicating with John, leading him, influencing him, listening to his concerns and such. If the stakeholder is currently at a state where I want them and desire them to be at, then I don't have to put much effort. If they are, for example, resisting my project, like Annie, she is currently resistant. So I need to understand why she's resisting my project, and I need to negotiate with her maybe. I need to influence her again, exercise my emotional intelligence competence and such, in order to move her to a more desired engagement level. So with the engagement of stakeholders, you need, again, different types of competencies and skills. So to conclude, the right brain has to do with critical interpersonal skills such as emotional intelligence, active listening, negotiation, conflict resolution. Any skill that has to do with others, then it falls under the interpersonal skills, which is a human skills, people skills, which is part of your right brain. I hope you enjoyed the webinar. I look forward for receiving any email from you. If you have any questions, please do email us. I wish you a pleasant weekend. Enjoy your weekend ahead. Thank you so much for attending our webinar, and looking forward to see you on future webinars as well. Thank you.